I want to say a couple of words before we start. I think it's very important to understand that whatever criticism you're going to hear is not directed at you as a person, it's not directed to you as a scholar. It's directed at the particular project that you made up very fast in like 3 hours, right? So obviously it has a lot of flaws, it must have a lot of flaws. It's normal that your colleagues will find, faults in it. And I think it's good that they find faults in it, because if they don't find faults in it, it probably means that it's absolutely meaningless project, so there is nothing to say, so they will be simply silent. So again, I would strongly encourage you not to take it personally in any way, because I know that some of you come from academic settings when, well, it's not appropriate to criticize somebody publicly. You should only criticize behind the back. And there is this kind of paranoia in academia in Western countries, because you never know what people really think about your presentation. You go to a job talk, you never know how it goes. You have certain hypotheses because everybody says that you are very smart, you're excellent, and you don't get an offer. You don't know why, etc. So we don't want to follow this protocol here, right? I mean, so we'll be very open. We'll be even probably more critical than we would normally be, because we want the session to work.
Okay, so our group is titled Sustainable 21st Century towards an interdisciplinary consensus.
But my question, Melissa, is actually, I'm not really sure what is your research question?
Generally, I think our research question is there's various discussions about sustainability right now coming from different academic disciplines, from the humanities, from the social sciences, about how to approach sustainability. And there's disagreement and controversy about what sustainability means. It's an underdefined, ill-defined term. We want to survey the controversy on sustainability discourse, whether it's in academics, but also outside academics as well, about how to save the planet, about whether even saving the planet is a worthwhile question to ask. And then, from that perspective, possibly approach whether there is a better solution or a more robust account of sustainability. Because some people attack the idea of sustainability, and this is what I'm interested in personally, or critique the idea of sustainability, who are very pro-ecological, pro-environmentalist, but yet don't like the idea of sustainability because they think it's dependent on this very old-fashioned idea of nature as some capital N thing out there that exists in the world. So they want to criticize and deconstruct nature. And I think if we build on their critiques, we might be able to offer a more robust conception of what sustainability is. So I think overall our project is, and we can maybe get some disagreement here, but it's to survey the controversies in sustainability discourse, and as a group then with different disciplines come to more of a consensus about what a more robust account of sustainability might be.
One could say that various problems were not treated in our disciplines, which are the social sciences, the humanities, and a little bit also the natural sciences. So we want to analyze this problem of what is sustainability and what can our disciplines contribute to the analysis and to contribution to proposing a solution.
Are you guys the first ones in the world to ask these questions? I mean, this is something people never thought of asking. Why is it that the world, well, government, blah, blah, blah? Or if
Sure.
they have, why are you different?
The answer is that if we're going to understand something, and part of how we act, our habitus, is informed by specific ideas about the world. And through that, we reenact that knowledge. It's kind of, we reify these ideas. And the way we reify them has an impact on the physical world. So it's very important to ask the question, what is the foundation of this culture, the global now culture, and what are the implications? Because we will be engaged in knowledge making anyways. Is this knowledge related to how we live, or is it totally alienated and disruptive of the whole life and evolution of life on Earth?
And if it is disruptive, then what?
Well, the way the data is going is that it is disruptive, because
Okay. Why
we
is
look
it a
at the
problem?
rising
Okay, yeah, I know. So,
acidification,
yes, maybe that's for the better. I mean, why is this scholarly problem? Everybody's going to die, fine.
so then why
Life is only on Earth and not for long. Perfect.
but then why have research in the school and universities in that respect? Like, we don't need anything.
Yeah, but I'm just curious how honest you can be as researchers. Imagine you, for example, come to the conclusion that the idea of sustainability is unsustainable in philosophical terms. It has to be rejected. Will you say that, or will say, well, it's not very good because we will stop, taking care of the environment if we say that, so we'll better say something more politically correct?
So I think that we might be able to talk about sustainability, not in just terms of, yeah, we're all going to die, so let's go there, but because sustainability gives us home for the time being. I want someplace to live. I want boundaries. I want borders. I mean, not borders like a wall between me and Mexico, but I want boundaries like it's nice to have a wall and a roof over my head. It's nice to have the creaturely comforts. That's why I want sustainability.
Liberalism and the politics of competing rationalities.
Is there a strong hypothesis here that we are in a post-liberal age or not? Is that the hypothesis that you're going to test or not? Is the idea that you've decided in a strong way that we have entered into some new realm as a result of something? I thought I heard at some point that it's because of the new media structure, but maybe I didn't understand it correctly. Do you all subscribe to that idea that a new media reality has overtaken us, and for those reasons we are in a new world with regard to the way politics works and the way individuals make decisions or take part in shared rationalities, or not? I'm just not sure what this is, I guess, back to the basic thing. What is the hypothesis that's being tested? What is the research question which is being pursued?
I'm actually not sure. I'm not sure about how much you really want to keep both liberalism and rationalities in the project title. So, because of course, if it's about liberalism, then it's really about a, globally speaking, a subculture. It's in a small island, which is an exception, whereas, of course, other parts of the world is statistically the norm, like China, like the third world, the global south, right? Russia among the sort of on this list, right? So, however, if it's a question about kind of a study of rationalities, ethnography or sociology of how people make decisions or don't make decisions, how decisions are made for them, that's kind of a fascinating and a really excellent project, but it is not really confined to like Western liberal societies or Russia. This is a really broad comparative project. And then you have to think whether, precisely what I think John has mentioned, that whether how you approach religion from this point of view, how you sort of approach the sort of questions about religiosity. And there's, of course, a huge anthropological question. It's actually a matter of debate to what extent you can make an assumption that people are actually, making choices, that's the best way to approach human beings. So my question is really about whether you want to keep the two, liberalism, the problematic of liberalism, and the problematic of rationalities in the project title.
As one of the people who was advocating for the use of the word liberalism, I was acting on the assumption that neoliberal economics is something that unifies everybody, even if they are operating out of a traditional religious paradigm, and that even in countries like China or Singapore, where I lived up until quite recently, neoliberalism is a kind of a dominant economic paradigm, and it brings with it a whole lot of culture and cultural tensions, and it was within that context that I wanted to keep the word liberal there, and I felt that if we just talked about competing rationalities without the liberalism qualification, it would become too general a project. So we were kind of moving back and forth between being too general and being too particular, and this was what we came up with as a compromise.
The question is, do you think neoliberalism is rational or irrational? That would be already a starting point. And then classify different kinds of real liberalism, and then neoliberalism is on one side, and then there are others. And where is the rational element? That would be the first step, probably.
First of all, I must confess that I'm a big fan of studies of neoliberalism and Foucault, but now I'd like to play a devil's advocate and ask you, well, everybody knows that the Academy produces tons of papers on liberalism and neoliberalism, on post-rationality, on all that stuff. Now, how would you differ from all that?
Our title for today is Existence, Resistance, Reaction, Social Consequences of Capitalist Transformations. Okay, so we had, of course, our initial muddled conversation, and this is a kind of a diagram that helped us hone in on our conversation a little bit. And it's not meant to be really literal, but kind of like an in-process showing you how we were thinking. So we have one axis or interval of precarity and security in relation to capitalism and everyday practices of people's lives, and then another interval between compliance and resistance or refusal. I like to think that maybe if we curved the two lines into rings, interlocking rings that rotated on each other, it might be slightly more accurate. And then the second chart at the bottom, this is kind of the flow chart that helped us start to think about how we're going to approach our different sites of study. So you see on the left we have capitalist transformations, demands, regulations, and laws, non-state, neoliberalism, neo-library, and those kind of lead to different forms of precarity in people's daily lives. And probably if we did another chart, there'd be feedbacks. There would be a looping between the transformations of capitalism and precarity. And out of these kind of different precarious situations, people have reactions that might be protest or covert refusals or collateral damage. And then there's also collateral damages and violences coming out of these precarities. So as we were trying to get more specific, we tried to address the global significance of the project, and what we have listed up here is not what we're going to accomplish, but this is the larger global conversation that we want to engage with. And some of my colleagues who know more about Russia pointed out that they don't know of any specific center in Russia that deals explicitly with these global conversations about capitalism. So global tendencies and strategies of neoliberalism, new theories of cognitive capitalism and post-Fordist economy, and then new critiques. So this is kind of new critiques of capitalism, and then also their flip side, the same conversations about changes in capitalism and precarity and people's reactions are also discussions within corporations about how to innovate and make business better. Goals. We want to have a public impact. We're interested in disciplinary infection. And this is the idea that each of us would strive to learn something from the others, from their disciplines rubbing on our practices, and then we would take that to publish in our fields and try to change something about our field's conversation from that disciplinary infection. We want to contribute to knowledge about capitalism as a global phenomena and popular theoretical debates, and also to promote the SAS as a center for discussion about capitalist transformations.
Our starting point is the theories of new spirit of capitalism, of cognitive capitalism. So the idea that our time capitalism is changed. And now we have new forms of labors, more flexible, and a person needs to invest in his work much more than before. His emotions, his creativity, etc. So we also want like a kind of a check those theories, because, okay, yes, we have those ideas that capitalism, something very big, changed, and there is a new ideology and new forms of labor. So, but I didn't see a lot of research about how it works in different countries, within one country, in different spheres. So this new spirit of capitalism, is it the same in France, in US, and in Russia? So maybe in Russia we don't have new spirit of capitalism, or maybe it's another new spirit of capitalism. Or maybe in Russia here we have one spirit of capitalism, and there we have another spirit of capitalism. So I think that our impact can be also in these global, like very philosophical theories about how capitalism changed, by giving some more explorations and more details.
Why should we care? Well, probably there is a difference between Russia and the United States. So what? Why should I be interested in the variety of this phenomena if the center of this phenomena is obviously not in Russia, but somewhere, let's say, if you speak about kind of traditional centers in the United States or in Southeast Asia, right? If you want to look at tradition and the combination of tradition and neoliberalism, go to China, right? I mean, why Russia? I mean, this is not the most, I would say, at least from my perspective, it's not the most outstanding case in any sense, right? I mean, It's probably a unique combination of various factors that you can find elsewhere, but why should I, as a scholar of neoliberalism, should be interested in this particular combination in Russia? Just for the sake of kind of completeness, I want to have a complete list of all kinds of neoliberalism, all right, but that's not interesting, right? I mean, who needs the complete list?
Now Russia is an avant-garde role in the world system, because aggressive neoliberalism, together with a neoconservative agenda of the state, and together with semi-protectionist measure, is something that we have in Russia for like many years under Putin, and which is now only appearing in the West. And I think that also some hidden forms of resistance is something that Russian workers learned very well during last years, and which workers in the West is now start learning in the era of decline of big social movements inspired by economic hardships.
You've associated capitalism with a whole series of horrible things happening to people: exploitation, abuse, precarity, unemployment, all these horrible things. And then whenever I read critiques of capitalism and they are in this kind of spirit, I think, how on earth is this thing able to spread to so many places around the world? Is it, some kind of a disease that spreads uncontrollably? So how do you understand this mechanism of attraction that capitalism has, and why it's able to spread so effectively if it's associated with so many horrible things?
As we said, the title is New Media, New Experiences, New Identities, Communication, Knowledge. The intertwining and the interplay of these, of new media and communication knowledge. So what is our basic assumption? That knowledge emerges from communication. That if that is the true, and that is our assumption, and we think that we were discussing it very thoroughly, and we believe in that, and we have also some proofs for that. That new media brings with it new communication, right? And the only conclusion is that media determines the knowledge production. Now, okay, what happened now?
The media determined knowledge production, I suppose.
Right, okay.
I have two problems, because it's the new media that you presented, it's not really new. Would you like to develop the new media? That's the first question, what I understood from you. New media, because the new media that you have presented here, but the second question is much more crucial, I think. You have not the psychologist among you. And the research that you will do and the experiment that you will invent will not be recognized worldwide, because the psychologists are in this process are the most important people. So I can criticize your project from many points of view. It's the only project that respond to me, and I think it's really exciting and interesting. But McLuhan suggested to develop the new educational program based on the new media, audiovisual media, in the 70s, and wrote this program for the Canadian Ministry of Education or whatever. So nothing was done, but you didn't relate to that. You would like to develop the new educational project after McLuhan. So, but then you said you will stage and invent some experiment with the new media. These things were done and is in process of doing really worldwide. In Zurich, they are collaborating, and even with technology, because they try to understand, is the digital high D or high rate video, what is the difference? So that they shoot the same script with different camera, with different high rate sequencing, and then they conduct the research in different social strata with different psychologists. So it's a huge team who are working on these things, and who are checking the results with statistics, with psychologists, with sociologists, with media technologists, and so on. How would you, without
any of these resources,
what conducted? How could you compete?
In fact, partially theoretical background is rooted in American pragmatism, so it means that we are based on experience. That is why mind is embodied. It's embodied mind, so mind and body are not divided in our group. And we gain experiences, and experience means also like getting some knowledge. And we understand that this increase in knowledge can come not only through these like pure cognitive processes, but through these bodily experiences and emotional experiences. So in this case, would I answer your question?
Just everybody just like stand up. Like, I know we just took a coffee break, but like give yourself a little jiggle and then let out a little sigh. Everyone, just give it your all, just once, just for me once. And now shake your head no, nod your head yes, wiggle your bum a little bit. Okay, great. Well, we'd like to open it up to questions, please.
Yeah. Well, I must say that now if somebody wants to discredit the school, they know which part of the footage is to cut out and show to the public, right? This is what they call scholarly discussion at SAS. We are starting our second session. We are going to have 6 groups today. And this is the order of the presentation. So liberalism, capitalism, creativity, materiality, visual self-representation, and sustainability.
It's no longer the end of liberalism, the crisis of liberalism. And then the rest has remained the same. Let me just, because we have only 7 minutes, go very quickly through these headlines. So we believe that there is a crisis of liberalism. That means it is not that liberalism disappears and that something else substitutes it, even if that is neoliberalism. I don't even want to mention the word because it's something completely different. No, but we believe that there is liberalism, and then that liberalism has developed something wrong in itself. It is no longer the liberalism as it emerged from Enlightenment, or maybe the Enlightenment was even the problem. That has to be established. There is a certain decline. So the first thing, there is the traditional institutions, parties, media do not function in the way in which they functioned first. The rise of technocracy, I mentioned yesterday lots of things. You have the virtualization, you have statistics everywhere, you have bureaucratization. All this is liberal. It is not an anti-liberal movement, but it emerged inside liberalism and led to a crisis.
When was liberalism not in crisis? Or to put it otherwise, if you look at major European countries, Germany, France, Britain, there was no party with the name liberal in it forming a coalition government for quite a while. They never in history formed a single party government. If you look at, you're talking about ISIS, if you look at the Islamic world, there has never been a liberal regime, politically speaking, in that part of the world. So, aren't we kind of idealizing some period in history where things were liberal and then they started going badly? Which period would you point as, the good times for liberalism?
Do you see the new digital media as a cause, as a symptom, as a tools? And what is the consequence? The consequence, what is it? And what will you do in the frame of the media studies? What will be your subject?
But maybe what you want to ask is what is going wrong and how should we name it and how can we define the causal principles behind it? Is it the same thing or is it different things? as opposed to starting with this big, huge, vague idea of liberalism, and saying we have Trump and Marine Le Pen and Putin and et cetera, all are because of a crisis of liberalism. Maybe the question should be, are these things linked together, and what is the cause?
I see this as sort of like a fight between philosophy and political theory. And so Hannah Arendt gave up, she loved philosophy, but she gave up on philosophy at the beginning of the Second World War, before the Second World War, because she thought that it couldn't just grasp with all these political realities going on in the world. And it seems like we're trying to, this is like this philosophical imperialism that's going on here. You're trying to almost force this philosophical structure onto this messy reality of the world and make it fit, and it just doesn't want to fit, and it keeps pushing back, and you get all these suggestions. Does it quite fit? Doesn't it quite fit? Oh, it has to be liberalism, it has to fit this frame of liberalism, but why really? And maybe my suggestion would be like, why not let the messiness of the world work its way first and worry about how it's going to explain itself second.
Hi, so we're Capitalism, and the title of our project is Global Crisis, Local Reactions, Forms of Resistance and Adaptation in Russia.
The idea is resistance is something which is close to what James Scott named like hidden or symbolic resistance. The idea is it's not enough just to say that we have protests against against neoliberalism in the West, and we don't have protests against neoliberal reforms in Russia. So our idea is to reveal some personal, hidden types of reaction towards economic hardships. So hidden boycotts, domestic violence as redirection of your own reaction toward your boss, or so these more personalized and hidden forms of either resistance or adaptation towards shocking neoliberal reforms.
For example, when speaking of domestic violence, when a man beats his wife, he's resisting change in gender relations. Is that resistance?
It's not resistance. So
why it isn't a resistance?
It's an open question.
What do you mean when you talk about under-theorized forms of resistance in the West? So you find this theoretical reflection on different forms of resistance insufficient, weak, or something like that. Maybe you clarify these stance.
What, for example, Zizek does is similar to what you do, but you think that if Zizek writes about Coca-Cola and Hollywood, he has a worse field, because it's obscured because Zizek would obviously claim, as he likes to claim, that all kinds of open resistance, of course not resistance at all, but you have to look at what looks like acceptance, but in fact that's where resistance can actually hide. This is his main claim, and he's not alone, right? I mean, he's for the whole tradition. And you think these guys cannot discover things that you are going to discover because they don't address Russia. My question to you was, what are you doing with these leftist, economically naive guys who, who are part of the project?
As to cultural analysis, we are going to study what are the new values and the new priorities across the regions and over the time, and who are new leaders and new heroes in this transitional period, and what are the new hosted cultural dimensions and why.
And our title is Creative Digital Tools for Communicating Evidence. So we have a general framework for what we are doing, which is a problem of verification of knowledge in the humanities and social sciences. Our hypothesis is that we believe that there is a big interesting potential for the usage of creative digital tools to substantially, radically transform academic research done in the humanities, and also the problem of communicating that research to the public, general audiences. So we see ourselves as, because we are a small team, we cannot do big experimental projects ourselves, but we can develop certain ideas to communicate to other academics in order for them to use them both in their own academic research and also perhaps to use them as methods to communicate whatever the research they do to the general public.
I still do not understand what is the point of your research. So the creativity is the subject and the digital tools are actually something that you would like to connect. But you will research the existing platform with these digital archives. Would you like to research or analyze the tools that this platform use? What is the difference to the, I don't know, to the things that what Manovic is doing in SUNY or the other people in this direction?
All right, our hypothesis. Love is the primary mode of connection between humans and materials. Okay, so our basic research question that we're trying to answer here is, what are the modes of connection, or the primary modes of connection between human and materiality? I mean, that's the general question that we're trying to answer. And I think it's a different way of framing the more general question of what is materiality, which is a pretty broad question. And what is materiality in an age, or what does it mean to inhabit a material world in an era when materiality is increasingly facing us, when population levels are increasing, when biodiversity is decreasing, when sea levels are increasing? What does it mean to inhabit a material world? And our hypothesis is that love may be one mode of thinking about this. We're going to use a case study to think about this. We're going to use oil to help us think through this project. And Duskin has done quite a bit of work on petroleum, and he'll speak a bit about that in question and answer time. But our basic idea is that oil is not only an important aspect of contemporary motor society, but it's also a social lubricant. And it moves through our time, or it's a quintessential. Quintessential materiality that we have a love-hate relationship with, and so oil is love is the case study where we want to question this. So alternative. Oh, I have to hit these several times. Alternative or established views. So other answers that have been given to this question. So domination. So once again, the question is, what are the modes of connection between humans and materiality? Or what? Yes. So domination is one of them. And from Descartes up through the modern era, one is that the world is passive. The material world is just passive and inert, and humans are related to it in terms of domination, in terms of they subject it. We are subjects, and we assert our authority over it. We see this certainly in Descartes, but we also see it in most modern philosophers. You also see it in Foucault's work on knowledge and power. Another way to talk about this established view, though, is to also think of it as the denial that this is even a theoretical problem. So here I think that you have a lot in mainstream liberal academy who will say, well, why are you worried about the materiality of what? We have no problem. We're living our lives just fine right now. Why do you want to talk about your relationship to oil? Why do you want to talk about your relationship to the trees? We're just fine as is. And I think that denial of our dominating relationship to the material world is an aspect of this dismissiveness of this first established view. Two, so exchange is another common or established view here, and this you often see in economists. You don't have to be just a capitalist economist. Karl Marx talked about it the same way. You also see an anthropologist like Moss. You see it energy and thermodynamics in physicists, but also in work like Terence Deacon, who's working now, he's somewhere on the west coast of America. And you see it most dominantly in work in the new materialisms, who are really approaching our question. They're interested in exactly the same question we are. What does it mean, or what is the relationship between human beings and the material world? But the answer they propose is not love. They propose vitality often, and that's Jane Bennett's answer. Graham Harman gives or Bruno Latour gives that answer as well. He might say assemblages, which is a version of vitality. Graham Harman says a version of that. He sometimes calls it withdrawal. But these are all different variations on how it is we're related to the materiality, to the material world. And what really motivates this last group, and where we really find ourselves too, is that today, or increasingly, the material world seems to be facing us in a new way, or an increasingly problematic way, with certain material realities, whether what I said at the beginning, increased population, increased sea level, decreasing biodiversity, that are calling us to respond to it and not just ignore it. And I wanted to add to the list, because we didn't, also media. And here I wanted to put Deleuze and Guattari in there, because when they talk about us always being in the middle, or res media, I would even put Derrida in there when he talks about us not being outside the text. Vicky Kirby makes that argument. And someone like Jussi Parikka, I think, because there's a lot of media studies people here, I think that's an important other avenue that we relate to the world. Our mapping. So we sort of mapped it along 4 different axes. Some of us are more theoretical, some more empirical. John and I are more theoretical. Evenji and Duskin are more empirical. Diachronic and synchronic. John and Evenji are more diachronic. Duskin and I are more synchronic. And you can read how we specifically think we're going to contribute to this project. This isn't what we're interested in necessarily, but this is how we think we're going to intervene in this specific project.
From my point of view, the reason why love is a motive approach to material objects is because I've been doing a project on the noon topos in literature, looking at noon as a moment of encounter with, as a moment of encounter with the material in works from Homer up to alien encounter narratives. And for example, in the North African desert in the early Christian period, the monks used to describe an encounter with the demon of noontide, which was the moment when the sun was directly overhead. There was no variation in the landscape and they were subject to distraction. And they were advised not to seek distraction, but to stick with the experience, and they would then arrive at a moment of transcendence. And there was an inherent tension in this advice between eros and agape. Eros is what drives you to seek distraction, to gratify yourself with the satisfaction of some material appetite, and agape is what happens when you relinquish that kind of love and seek a kind of a higher purpose. And this is something that was also part of Augustine's theorizing. He talked about how, as human beings, we have to love, that our primary affect as human beings is love, and the reason that we come up with pathological relationships to the world is because we love the wrong objects, or we love in the wrong way. And I thought that he talked also a lot about his infamous, youthful activities as a womanizer and a seeker of Epicurean pleasures. He talked about that in terms of addiction. And so the connection to oil for me was to do with our addiction to oil as a society. And Duskin has a lot of work about us being petroleum people, as distinct from people whose primary relationship to matter is through I'm not sure, fish or other sources of food or energy, and we're petroleum people, but our relationship to petroleum is like that of a food addict or something. We're addicted to petroleum. So this is one way of thinking about love as our primary relationship to perhaps the most important material substance for our economies and societies.
In my studies, I find that oil is so pervasive that it defines the terms of what is good and bad. that it lays out the material resources and the ground for having an opinion for or against. So to be against oil is quite like being for oil. And that's why I turned to indigenous theories to try to find other bases in which I find theories of material relation that have to do with kinship with the non-human relations that sustain each other. So that, again, kind of comes to love.
Why only love? There's many other ways of relating to the material world. And love, shouldn't that take us more to linguistics or a linguistic approach? Why materiality? It seems like what the new materialisms are trying to do, they're trying to get to the material world, and yet it's just so damn hard because we're stuck in this linguistic-ness. And that's a good point. So I think why love, and we had a hard time settling on the word love, it's a word, but I wanted law, I also wanted an analogy, we had different, we had several different topics, but I think why we settled on the word love is because it's, and how we're conceiving or how we're working with it right now, or defining it, is not in terms of its linguistic use, but we're thinking of it as sort of the connective tissue or the tendrils that that hold that bind things or that hold things together. Is it the only way that that people relate to the material world? No, but I don't think that the question is it the only way that people relate to the material world? I think of it as sort of the glue that holds the material world together.
When Archpriest Avakum, 17th century famous Russian, I don't know how to call him, oppositionist or traditionalist or whoever else, what you prefer to call him, came to Siberia and saw the nature, he was really impressed and felt the wonder of this God-created world. He saw plenty of fish, he saw plenty of wood, plenty of forests and really richly manifested nature. For him, it was a manifestation of God, a manifestation of God's love to humanity, and he related himself to this world. So this is the relation I think is, at least for me, as a historian, most interesting, to see from the internal position of human towards these objects, material objects and material world, how we relate ourselves to it, rather than to look from the this distant objectivist point of view and try to objectively tell us what exactly relations are.
Love is dominance, exchange, vitality, and energy. So love encompasses all these terms that you suggested as alternative.
Well, I enjoyed the project, and I actually disagree with most of what has been said about the uncomfortable character of love, because love is a political term in its own right. You can find it in American Marx, then it reappears in German idealism, then all the way down to Durkheim, and quite recently Marshall Silence came up with a new interpretation of what actually somebody as notorious as Lucien Lévy-Bruhl meant with his idea of the law of participation. Actually, he meant that we are integrated by love. So first, it's a concept. It's not just a metaphor, and so we shouldn't be shy about that. And second, it is understudied, which is good for you, of course, because it might be quite a promising topic. But at this point, my question actually starts. I cannot quite get the idea of oil as love. Well, Ilya might add something on that account. Here in Russia, there is a kind of conservative narrative that we're so rich because of our material resources, that is because our motherland loves us. And you might get quite popular with propagating this term and with this idea of motherland loving us by producing oil for us. But I just cannot see the field for the study here. So what are you going to study? And what is the research question concerning oil as love?
can we give up oil? In this project, I think we could definitely give up oil.
So today our topic is slightly revised. Now we are visual self-representations and media experiences in Middle and Digital Ages. Because today we looked into the history as deep as to the Middle Ages, and to our surprise, except Dmitry, he was the only person who wasn't surprised. So we discovered something unusual. Dmitry shared his thoughts on images in the Middle Ages, and it turned out that, in fact, these visual images, for example, stamps, they are not, can be explained not through the texts, but they are mini narratives, or in fact not even mini, they are narratives themselves. And they are not only just narratives, they are narratives of self-representations, and which is moreover, they are narratives of embodied self-representations, because it's turned out that in the Middle Ages, these stamps, they do not only have status distinctions, but in fact, people who were having their personal stamps, they were trying to bring, I would say, a piece of their body, like a bodily mark to their stamps, and it could be literally, it can be imprint of a tooth, it could have been a piece of a hair, and recent discoveries, they demonstrated that these stamps, they are these imprinted bodily experiences that can be developed into narratives.
I can explain from the position of a director, the project that says, our team discovered that contemporary digital age is the new Middle Ages, can sell. If I say, well, our project discovers that there are similarities and differences between contemporary and well, it sort of doesn't sell, because if people sell, of course.
This is the image, and behind the image, there is a mini narrative. This is a story. And
I have a title for your project. I have this, we published this, The Gaze of a Night, right? And then they say, well, our team, first of all, says there is a lot of similarity, right, between self-representation there. Then it puts eye tracker on contemporary viewers. So, and then it says, well, that's exactly how medieval knights gazed. The project will be our project reconstructs the gaze of a knight. Even though we cannot apply the eye tracker back there, but this is convoluted means. All right. So let's just stop these questions. Have a suggestion to the group. Yeah. Okay. And then Grigory also have a suggestion, I think, and then I'll finish.
Small suggestion, because normally in all media and film studies, the gaze and the narrativization are separated. So please think about the implementation of narrativization, because you were spoken about that, how you connect it, because normally it's really two separated areas. And if the popular cultures, why not Games of Thrones?
So sustainability, the pink elephant that no one has seen in the humanities and the social sciences, among others. And so the team members are Leila, Marina, Tomasz, and myself. So our hypothesis is that, at least in part of the disciplines, and some may be affected more than others, do not take sustainability adequately into account, both on the theoretical side as on the methodological side. And our next hypothesis is that an interdisciplinary dialogue and real collaboration is a privileged way to remediate this problem. We need also the input, so not only of the other disciplines, but also of fieldwork and of scientific data. So we believe that they are indispensable for progress in our respective disciplines. And a very good way to test these, the study we want to do is to focus on a concrete case study, being the high north regions in Eurasia and North America.
I'm no expert, so maybe I'm totally off on this, but it seemed to me that sustainability is a really utopian term, one which doesn't correspond to any reality because, as we know, we're all going to die, as Andrei said. There is no sustainability. Ultimately, the fact of human existence in the world is unsustainability. So it seemed to me that maybe it would be better to start with the presupposition that what we should be studying is unsustainability.
You are telling right now that Cold War didn't turn into the hot war because of the notion of sustainability. Is it the same of self-preservation kind of instinct?
This is exactly one example through which this thing we call sustainability manifests itself. This is just another, it can be in our instincts, hopefully, that we self-preserve our species, but there are other aspects to sustainability as well.
Then it looks like a kind of history of ideas project, right? I mean, there is this notion of sustainability understood differently. It's not a concept, scientific concept, it's like a notion that is used politically. It's also used in scholarships of various kinds, usually bad ones. And then you say that, well, that's a material force, right? And that influences history. Like, for example, this notion of that we have to preserve the Earth at all costs prevented the Cold War from turning into the hot war, right? And you can say that now there is this politics of climate change kind of, and also there is this overarching notion of sustainability that influences the public, influences ideology, influences decision makers, and influences scientists, which, as we know from some scientists, this article, Aliens Cause Global Warming, written by a Caltech physicist, about this kind of pseudo-scientific kind of trends, where you have to be politically correct and you cannot argue against climate change, for example, because you will be subjected to criticism as the oil company agent, etc.
Two alternative suggestions. One of them was to give up on sustainability and to end up with the group, which might be an option. Otherwise, I would put it in the direction already indicated by Andrei. There's a nice trick of making a substitution. Instead of studying sustainability, instead of fighting for sustainability, it would make sense to study sustainability. And that would allow you to avoid the definition, because you start from the premise that there is such thing as sustainability. So look, there's a lot of people who are fighting for sustainability. It is a range of important movements. And these people, they are doing things that have impact. So that might be a solution. Well, we already had this kind of solution in the case of love. The people who would like to study love actually don't argue for love, but they are trying to study the politics of love, which is a different thing, and it might be a good trick. So in your case, it might be a trick of studying the politics of sustainability, or sustainability as it actually exists in history, in economic policy, as a concept, field for the study in history of ideas. So a trick that would make you to avoid this discussion next time.
So I have a provocative answer that involves a different form of study. So if I could ask everyone to raise one of their hands, just raise one of your hands. And now, I know this is going to get kind of uncomfortable, but let's just try it, okay? So I want you to turn to someone near you, and I want you to just touch their hand. Okay, just touch the hand of someone near you. So you can, okay, and now you can feel that. Okay, now stop touching. Let's take a little break. That was kind of intense. Okay, and now, so you felt yourself touching this other hand, this other person. Now, this next time, I want you to touch the touching back. So I want you to touch, and I want you to feel the touch touching you. And if that doesn't make sense, let's just try it. Let's touch. So lightly touch. So touch, and then, and now focus on not just feeling your hand touching the other hand. Feel the other hand touching your hand back.
if all you do is compare, what does your article look like? It's a kind of a set of tables saying, well, these are the similarities, these are the differences, end of article? Or are you planning to have some kind of meaningful argument as well?
So I'm not quite sure what stays the same and what changes. And proto-narratives, I'm not quite sure what that is and why you've chosen that as the thing which is the same between the Middle Ages and the present. And then the follow-up question would then be, what does the identification of these two same things tell us in some larger way about the Middle Ages or about the present, and how? Because it seems like, we know that these are different eras. We know that they're very different eras in lots of different ways. What this project promises to do is to tell us that something has stayed the same. What is that something, and why is it important? Like we know, for instance, that people still have fingernails. They had fingernails in the Middle Ages, but it's not important. You're claiming that, in fact, you're going to identify something that no one has noticed before, which is the same then and the same now, and it is going to have significance for our understanding of both of these eras. And I would just like to have a clear idea of what that is, or at least a clear idea of what a range of hypotheses about what it could be are.
What is the relationship between humans and the material, and why is it important to establish it?
I think our hypothesis isn't that the world ought to or should be understood in terms of love, but that it is. And I think part of the tension, and John was getting into this about being shoehorned into the social sciences, is that in questioning the Cartesian subject-object relationship, we're also questioning the is-ought distinction that was a consequence of that. So we're pulling ourselves, out of that entire modern historical assumption that to always have an ought a hypothesis followed by an is.
Are you satisfied with the fact that in your approach there will also be this blind spot called, for example, innocent suffering?
1968 in Germany. Students protest, the Frankfurt University was on strike. Adorno cancels the seminar because he has problem with his mistress. Sexual harassment, I suppose, was not involved. So he appointed an assistant, nobody knows him. He teaches a seminar that the students do not attend. This is Niklas Luhmann, who gives a seminar on love, especially. So, yeah, love especially. This is his book, yes. But it's nobody cares in 1968 about the assistant and about the topic. So it's a fascinating proposal to think about love as a drive of the human relationship, but it's not only innocent suffering, but also wars, destruction of ecology, and all kind of unsustainability, what we discussed in the first group.
I'm still into oil.
This team's project is titled Resist Like a Russian, Join Global Discussion.
The vibrant discussion on cognitive capitalism is going on globally, and it has been suggested that cognitive capitalism both appropriates critique and limits collective action. It is what we know from theory and from research done in the West. So that is why researchers from this family of theories are focused on hidden tactics of resistance. So we decided to change a bit our perspective and focus on these hidden tactics. So unusual, unconventional ones, for instance, when you internalize possible conflict with your boss and it moves into your personal life. So that is why we talk about self-destruction, etc., etc. So, however, within Russia, so Russia has been excluded from this discussion, and however, within Russia there exist both new creative industries, which are similar to cognitive capitalism, and at the same time we have a solid tradition of hidden resistance, and that is why James Scott is so popular now in Russia under Putin. So our question is how we might to uncover and explain new forms of resistance and adjustments, these hidden forms, in Russia in order to make a theoretical contribution to the global discussion on cognitive capitalism and crisis. And so the fact that now we witness this moment of global crisis in Russia means that it's time to research it here in Russia. we see that before like 70s or 80s, zombies in movies captured factories. Then something happens, and zombies in movies start haunting people and eating their brains. So why we witness such a change in movies? Because cognitive capitalism came, and that is why zombie eat brains.
I just wonder why you guys wouldn't like to benefit from having economists in your team. Well, because that's a real challenge for all kind of critique of neoliberalism. That would be a real task to demonstrate that there is a viable alternative to neoliberalism in terms of efficiency, for instance, or in terms of productivity, in terms of making things work better and in a smooth way. So my question would be to the economists. How would you feel in this framework, and how would you contribute to this demolishing critique of neoliberalism? How would you put yourself on this agenda?
As an economist, I don't see the difference between cognitive and not cognitive capitalism. I see it in absolutely different way. You know, I see it like a coordinated market economy and liberal market economy, and that's all.
Everything that you guys could do is just to quarrel. Oh, he doesn't understand. But you couldn't stand up and say, well, this is the problem with your approach. You don't have an argument against mainstream economy. If your group, you know, if the target of your group to publish in some kind of leftist journal to the kind of mindful audience, to preach to the converted, easy, right? You can do that pretty well. You already done it. You don't need the school to do this. In the school, you should have a greater challenge. And one challenge is right here in the team. Make an argument that mainstream economists couldn't ignore. Now they can ignore all your arguments, and they do that successfully, and not only because they're institutionally more powerful and have more money, etc., but also because of certain weakness of the argument, I think.
I wonder what kind of cultural production are you going to analyze this? I mean, besides zombie movies, because this case with zombie as a symptomatic and critical representation of cognitive capitalism is absolute obvious and not new. Yeah, and precisely in Russian context, because you are going to analyze cognitive capitalism in a Russian context.
Today you can observe a lot of phenomena in contemporary world which may seem irrational, like some irrational behavior. For instance, people joining, populist movements, or some subcultures related to risk can be listed here, for instance, roofs, jumpers, and it seems a bit irrational because it's risky and it doesn't make sense why people join them, so there is no benefits. There are also some changes in the rationality related to making choices and cognitive choices. For instance, I know people vote for a particular president, and then you ask them why they vote. I have an interesting example from our previous interviews in Ukraine when we asked a person why she voted for Poroshenko. She said like, he's a fluent English speaker, so it's a good criteria to assess presidential performance, right? So how do people make irrational, rational behavioral and cognitive choices in this particular situation? And another question is, are they related to some fundamental historical, cultural changes? And if so how?
So the title of our project, represented by myself, my friend Louis Varvot, and our fellow enthusiasts, is, can the concept of free will be saved, or are we machines after all? Our research question is pretty simple. We are wondering how to reconcile, on the one hand, the intuitive sensation that we all have as human beings that we are free, and there is such a thing as free will, with some recent scientific findings in quantum mechanics and in neuroscience. So let me just talk briefly about how me and Louis quickly have together agreed on how we see the progress of, or the function of how human beings understand what free will is as defined by, let's say, percentage of what we can accept, or percentage or degree of freedom that we think we enjoy with the history of our universe. I know it's a lot to take in, so I'll guide you step by step. So essentially we start with our natural state where we don't even ask ourselves a question about our freedom because we naturally enjoy the act of acting freely, so we don't even conceptualize, right? It's not necessary, we just act. And then as our knowledge grows, so on this axis you have scientific progress, which is, for purposes of one graph, identified with the flow of time. So we subscribe to the progressive vision of civilization where the more time flows, the more scientific knowledge we have. The scientific knowledge starts to pose problems for what we can accept, or for the range of phenomena, or the range or the strength of the feeling that we have that there is such a thing as free will.
I remember, Tomasz, when we did the Skype interview with you, and we spoke about your field, which is the Cold War in the Baltic region and things, the sports cities, right? And I asked you, can you think of actually moving outside of your discipline? And you mentioned something like, yeah, well, I can speak about economic exchange in the Baltic Sea and maybe go into the Atlantic also.
I had absolutely no information who else was coming. So.
Yeah. I just admire the kind of change.
I'm rather in the field, so I have no problem with understanding why the progress of the neurosciences, in the middle of which we are now, actually endangers the concept of the free will. So this is pretty obvious, and not to say that it had already happened like 100 years ago during the last naturalist rise when we had this similar discussion. Which of course means that an army of philosophers is out there to demolish the freedom of will, and another army is now against them, trying to defend it. So the question would be, of course, what would be your contribution to this debate? Because the way you frame it is kind of usual.
There's a lot of blah 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 on interdisciplinary work, but in practice it's not done. The real interdisciplinarity is done by people who really want to do the effort to master the language of the other discipline. And this is a damn lot of work.
I can tell you an anecdote about free will, because I was in the city of Surgut, like about 1,000 kilometers north from here, which is one of our places where we want to attract high school students for the school. And I was at 5 schools, and I showed them the tomorrow's lessons that some of you are going to teach to high school kids. And I pointed to Louis' topic of free will. I said, well, look, there is this interesting class as well on free will. Yeah. And after that, I asked them the question, do you guys have free will? And I would like, in the room of, I don't know, let's say 40 people, I would like 2 hands up. And I thought, man, maybe Louis has one already. So, but then I asked the question, who thinks he doesn't have free will? And I also had about two. Right, yeah, it was always the same.
Do a little And now I want you just, on the count of 3, I want you to clap 3 times. 1, 2, 3.